I decided to make this after I read an article on the inverse. The article was titled, "Stellar Blade and the Male Gaze." It's curious that the concept of the male gaze, essentially the assumption that the audience consists predominantly of straight males, isn't consistently applied to different intellectual properties. For example, in Baldur's Gate 3, players can choose to play as a female character and even remove her clothing, as well as do the same with other females you meet. Yet there doesn't seem to be much criticism about this. It seems that complaints are selectively voiced, possibly as a form of spite by parts of the gaming journalism industry, against entities that operate beyond their influence. Intellectual properties by Wizards of the Coast and games developed by Square Enix, such as Nier Automata, are within their sphere of influence. So what selective spite is there to be aimed at them? Maybe Korea is too far away for them to have lunch with game dev marketing teams, to make them afraid of saying no to their demands. As is tradition, it would appear. Additionally, it's frustrating enough to see how the US is often viewed as overly controlling in global affairs. Now I have to worry about the US being viewed as a control freak in industries like gaming. The article complains about the male gaze, and how the game appeals to the male gaze. This is a theory that posits the assumption that straight males will be members of the audience. Honestly, no assumption needs to be made about that. It is well known that a lot of gamers are in fact male and straight. The only one making assumptions here is the article, because they assume that straight male audience members are bad, and they make a massive fuss about how this game is appealing to them. Sowing the seeds of doubt in regard to this game not appealing to other people is not cool. Do better. Of course, we can look at other IPs that have come before, and we can see that despite featuring a sexy lady with skimpy clothing, the fan base is made of a diverse crowd of people. I go to where discussion on this game is taking place, and I see a lot of women there too. The Jurnos will tell you to please ignore those real instances of real people who are in the market for these games. Listen not to the plebeian input, the Jurnos tell us. This new era of woke culture couldn't get the drop on earlier iterations of the sexy lady protagonist. Therefore, these days, the Jurnos have no choice but to try and gaslight you into thinking Nier Automata 2B's big fat ass was actually very progressive. But also, like trust me bro, Stellar Blade Eve's big fat ass is actually hurting women. It's also tiresome. This is the way that control freaks try to control the narrative. Then the article then creates a standard for the game devs to aim for. They would prefer it if they used only one woman for the production of Eve. The article initially argues that using multiple people to portray Eve's character is evidence of her objectification. However, later on, it backpedals, suggesting that it's necessary to wait and see whether the game actually objectifies her. They sounded sure about it just a second ago, but okay. This notion is somewhat naive, as it's common practice in both games and movies for multiple people to contribute to portraying a single character, not just one person at all times for all purposes. It is standard for tasks to be distributed among different talents. Yet, these journalists, while lacking a deep understanding of industry practices, position themselves as experts and express their views with a sense of indignation that is expected to be placated, as if the people on the other side of the conversation were somehow lower status, for lack of a better term. This type of behavior creates an imbalance. Although everyone has equal rights as individuals, in the context of this technical conversation, their indignation does not grant them the same level of authority in appraising what is best for the game, certainly not when compared to the game devs. This type of behavior creates an imbalance. Although everyone has equal rights as individuals, they are not equals in the context of this technical conversation. Their indignation does not grant them the same level of authority in appraising what is best for the game, certainly not when compared to the game devs. Control freaks, I'm telling you, man. They should just be direct about what it is that they actually want, and tell people what they prefer to see in Stellar Blade, instead of goose-stepping around it, acting indignant while they wait for you to placate them, like it's your job to do so. They would like it if a less feminine person was used as a reference for Eve's body, If recent games are any indication, then they'd prefer someone who is properly androgynous. And that's an acceptable personal preference for the game's journalists to have. Unfortunately for them, they have no power here. And perhaps that is the precise fact which tortures them so. She doesn't have to be an overly expressive cartoon character. And if she was, they'd probably use a fallback article where Eve is instead described as a typically overly animated ditzy girl, and then talk about how 2B from Nier Automata was properly stoic despite being a rockin' bombshell. They say that Eve is more of a doll than an action figure, in their opinion. But obviously the gamer can form their own opinion instead of accepting some random strangers. They say that Eve doesn't know she's sexy, which is certainly an opinion. If we saw someone attractive on the street, and I guessed that they were unaware of their attractiveness, while you, on the other hand, believe that actually they probably do, then I'd be holding the position that the person lacks the insight to recognize their own appeal. And it would be you who would be acknowledging that they have a fundamental level of self-awareness. And that would be the default position that any normal person would hold in that scenario. If I then suggested that they needed to smile smugly to themselves in order to signal to others that they know how sexy they are, then you'd probably call me insane. Eve should have a knowing gesture on her face, because she knows how attractive she is, they say. So the audience knows that she knows. Yeah, well, not everyone has to be portrayed as a narcissist. What is being suggested here is a dumb story device, and not every story should have a mechanism of this nature. If you absolutely need these sorts of things for any and all aspects within storytelling, then you are a child or a fool. And honestly, Eve is animated and stylized in proper amounts as it is. Ultimately, though, it's not up to the journalists to decide that for you now, isn't it? You don't have to pause and look in their direction for sanctioned elitists' opinions. They would like to fancy themselves as shepherds with tailor-made, designer opinions that are better than yours, and I would like to pop their bubble. The article goes on to complain that Eve isn't self-governing. But maybe someone should tell these people that video games with non-controllable characters are actually just movies. They go on to say that if she did have agency over herself, that she wouldn't present herself in such a manner. Since the player doesn't control Eve at the start of her morning, we can infer that she chose to wear her form-fitting outfit at the beginning of the game out of her own free will, indicating a deliberate decision on her part to present herself in that manner. This isn't a pure role-playing game with a blank character. This is Eve. The player can only do things Eve would already be willing to do. It's not about making the game less sexy. It is about making it sexier for more people, is a quote I found in there. But you know what? The attitude in modern Western media is definitely not about making things sexier to the broader audience. So I don't know what low-effort gaslighting attempt this is, but there it is for everyone to see. They complain that this game is seen as a symbol of conflict between gamers and gaming journalists. They try to gaslight people into thinking this is bad, while also trying to gaslight people into thinking that gaming journalists are not antagonistic towards gamers. That's going to be a big yikes from me, Hoss. It would be as if someone railed against wearing a suit and tie, only for more people to wear a suit and tie in turn, than having the original instigator complain about how these articles of clothing are a symbol for disagreeing with them. Good, actually. There's more pseudo-intellectual word salad that is thrown at us, this time criticizing the camera angles focusing on her posterior in a third-person perspective, and how lighting from behind her not only illuminates the space in front, but also highlights her figure from the back. This is certainly an opinion of all time. They say that the way that we are invited to look at things can cast them in an empowering light, or it objectifies them, which is presented here as a bad thing. Never mind how it is applauded by modern journalists when women are invited to be sexually liberated on OnlyFans, thusly equating objectification with empowerment. So, to me, it would seem as if these two things are not dialectically opposed. In other words, these two ideas are not fundamentally different or opposing. You can be both, and that's a good thing. Just not right now for some reason. Boy, this sure is confusing. since the journalist class just so happened to know when to apply this logic and when not to. We should, pay them to consult with us or something, right? Clearly, we just can't figure things out. Not for ourselves, anyway. There is no argument saying that Eve must be strictly objectified or empowered. Because she carries herself with runway model energy and is graceful, poised, good-looking, and deadly, I'm going to have to say that she's both, and that really isn't a problem. The people inviting you to play this game, the devs, are talented women and men, not incels as the media would like you to believe. The journalists can have the opinion that it is a problem, and that she can only be one or the other, which is certainly an opinion of all time. They can ask whether or not she is a doll or action figure, as if a person can't be both beautiful and highly competent. But they are going to have to placate themselves on this one. The rest of us are out to enjoy the game.